Hi, in this video we're going to talk about what German nationals should be doing ahead of Brexit and whether you as a German national should be applying for settled status. So the key question is what you should do as a German national, whether the settled status scheme is actually going to be viable for you, or whether it's going to be better for you to apply to naturalise as a British citizen. Now, before we start, I'm Tom Bradford, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we talk about citizenship and visas in a number of jurisdictions. I'd be very happy to help you if you're a German national or if you're any EU national living in the UK and you'd like to know about your options ahead of Brexit. So the key point then is that as a German national, notwithstanding any long residence that you may have had in the UK, you will need to regularise your status in the UK. Now, that's not to suggest that your stay is currently in any way irregular, but currently you're exercising treaty rights in the UK if you're here, most likely. So you have an unfettered right to be here in the UK as a EU citizen for 3 months, and after that you've got to be doing a so-called qualifying activity, for example, working or studying or being financially self-sufficient. Now, if you are doing a qualifying activity, your stay here in the UK is lawful. But when we leave the European Union, so upon Brexit, you will cease to have those treaty rights. Now, what we're looking at here, the scenario we're looking at in this video, is a no-deal Brexit, and this is the reason I'm making this video, is because over the last couple of weeks we've had the debate in the Commons. The deal with the EU has been rejected, so the question is, well, what can you do to safeguard your position? It's important not to scaremonger in all of this debate, because it's inconceivable that EU nationals would somehow be required to leave the UK. That's simply not going to happen. But the question is whether status will be sufficiently certain, and Theresa May commented a few days ago in the debate in the House of Commons that EU nationals are entitled to certainty and entitled to certainty in relation to their position. In other words, a no-deal Brexit would not give them that level of certainty, and among the provisions of the deal is an agreement, which is already provisionally agreed, on citizens' rights. But nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, so that would not apply. Now, the position now is that there is a pilot scheme open which allows certain people to apply for settled status ahead of Brexit. And I'm going to have a look at that at the moment, but it does represent a bit of an anomaly, because I think the starting point here is that if you are a German national, the settled status scheme that's going to be available for you to apply along with the other EU nationals in the UK is only going to be fully available upon or about Brexit Day. So we'll have a look at this pilot scheme in a moment and how it may be useful for you. But the full scheme is only going to be available and open upon Brexit. But what if there's a no-deal Brexit? Now, I've specifically put the question to the Home Office, will the settled status scheme be open upon a no-deal Brexit? The reason I asked that is because the UK government was insistent upon reciprocity by EU countries in respect of British nationals in the EU before it made arrangements in respect of EU nationals in the UK. And you can understand why that may be appropriate and necessary, arguably. I mean, arguably, they should simply make it available unilaterally. And indeed, that's the big question. Now, I've put this question to the Home Office, and I'm afraid the response is that they cannot say, they cannot guarantee that the settled status scheme will be available post-Brexit. Now, my personal view is it's very likely that it will be. I think there would be an uproar if it wasn't available. And the Home Office has also highlighted there's no other system available to regularise the status of EU nationals. So there's nothing else. There's no other plan in the event of a no-deal Brexit. It's only the settled status scheme. So I think it would have to be made available. But, and this is the point I want to make, there's no guarantee of it. Now, that's the first consideration for German nationals in the UK, and that applies. That the consideration applies to other EU nationals as well. There's a special consideration for German nationals, specifically to German nationals in the UK, and ahead of Brexit, and that relates to the German guidance on where dual citizenship is automatically recognised. So let's just have a look at this. So the option which most of my German clients are taking up is to apply to naturalise as a British citizen, and that's because of the German government's guidance. So the German government's guidance is that if you apply to naturalise as British after Brexit, under German nationality law, you'll require a so-called conservation permit in order to keep your German nationality. And that would not be the case if you applied pre-Brexit. So as a consequence, record numbers of Germans have applied to naturalise as British citizens now, pre-Brexit, in order to secure automatic recognition of dual nationality and secure their positions in the UK. So this is a really important point, I think, and it may be that as a German national, if you naturalise as British, but you only apply to do so post-Brexit, that your dual nationality would be recognised by the German government. But all I'm highlighting is that it would not follow automatically. You need to make an application for a conservation permit, so-called conservation permit in Germany to do so. Now, the reason for that is that after Brexit, the EU, after Brexit, the UK will not automatically will not be a member state of the EU. Of course, it will be a third country, so-called third country state. And that's why special provisions apply in respect of the automatic recognition of dual nationality. And that's why so many Germans have applied to naturalise as British citizens. Now the question is it too late to do so now? Is it too late to apply? It may be too late if you apply for settled status. And this is where we need to have a look at the difference between settled status and permanent residence. Now, permanent residence, when you make an application for permanent residence, it's an application to recognise a pre-existing right that you have acquired. So you acquire permanent residence automatically after you've been exercising treaty rights in the UK, for example, by working after a period of 5 years. But no one tells you, you don't get a letter, for example, to inform you of that. It's a right that arises automatically. Now, when you apply for a certificate confirming that you have acquired that right, you can have acquired that right at some point in the past. The importance of this is that you need, in most cases, a clear year, 1 year, before applying to naturalise as a British citizen. So that means you've got to show that your right of permanent residence accrued more than a year ago. Now clearly there's not a year left before Brexit now. So unless you can show that that right arose in the past, you may not be able to apply. Compare that with settled status. Now with settled status, when you apply, certainly all of the applications I've seen, when you apply, your settled status right is deemed to have arisen on the date of the decision. So you can't say and ask for a decision that it had arisen in the past. And I have one of the settled status grants for one of my clients, the letter, which I'm actually going to do a separate live webinar on, just to take you through the various stages of that. It's interesting, but there is a stark contrast between settled status accruing, so now you apply for it and you get settled status, and permanent residence, which you can argue has arisen in the past. So if you apply for settled status now, you will not then have a clear year before Brexit. So whereas if you apply for permanent residence, you can apply and get your application granted quickly. It can take up to 6 months, and yeah, there wouldn't be enough time before Brexit, but most of the applications I've made recently are determined within about 4 weeks, or if that, because the Home Office has put a lot of resources into determining EU applications, because there's going to be so many settled status applications, so there's a big team there. So they tend to determine those applications very quickly, and you can then apply to naturalise as a British citizen. Now, there's only 65, at the time of doing this live webinar, there's only 65 days left until Brexit. But what you can also do is apply in parallel. So if you make your application for permanent residence and you apply, then you can run your application for permanent residence and your application to naturalise as a British citizen in parallel. And then the application to naturalise as a British citizen will need to contain some representations in it to explain you've applied for permanent residence, and upon the grant of that application, you would like your application to naturalise as a British citizen to be determined. Now, you may ask, well, how are these applications going to be dealt with within this short period? Now, the German government guidance, and I'll drop a link below later today to the guidance. It says that as long as you apply pre-Brexit, then they won't hold the delay by the British government in determining your application, or the time that elapses while the British government considers your application against you. They won't hold that against you. So it follows that automatic recognition by the German government of dual nationality will follow if you apply pre-Brexit. So those are the key points. Now I promised to address this issue about what you do with the settled status pilot scheme. Now, the key thing about that is it's been broadened out as at, I think, two days ago now. Supposed to open out to everyone from the 21st of January. Certainly on my reading of it, but as at the time of making this video, so it's the 24th now, I haven't seen the route actually open, but I think that's opening imminently. It was broadening out. So if you can apply for settled status, then why wouldn't you? Well, the reason, as I say, is for some it may be appropriate, particularly if you haven't lived in the UK for 5 years, or you haven't been doing a qualifying activity for 5 years. You can apply and secure pre-settled status, which then puts you on a route to apply for settled status, and gives you that domestic law permission. But not everyone will want to do that, because there could be a benefit, as I say, in applying to naturalise as a British citizen, and because applying for permanent residence is a prerequisite of that, in most cases it's a prerequisite of that, you need to apply for permanent residence. Say that right arose more than 1 year ago. As I say, in most cases there's special provisions. For example, if you're married to a British national, then you will have that clear year, but since your right of permanent residence arose, which would then allow you to apply to naturalise as a British citizen. So yeah, so before applying for settled status, if you have a look at whether you can apply under the settled status pilot scheme, but before you actually apply, just check what your objectives are and whether it's going to be best for you to apply to naturalise, and therefore apply for permanent residence and then apply to naturalise. Bear in mind that an application for a permanent residence, confirmation of your right of permanent residence, is only a confirmation of your EU right, which will no longer subsist post-Brexit. But it's a necessary prerequisite for most people to make that application first before applying to naturalise. So this is a relatively complex area, although some people view it as being simple. Those are the key points that I wanted to cover in this live webinar. So thank you very much for listening. Of course, if you would like any help, by all means contact me. You can drop me a message on WhatsApp, or you can email me. I'm going to be producing more material on this shortly, so feel free to subscribe, like this video if you like it, and I will see you in tomorrow's live webinar. Thanks.